Hey everybody, just a quick follow-up to my Descent Legends of the Dark review. I'll put a link to that below if you missed it. But I had some couple of good discussions with two types of folks. One was folks that wanted more concrete examples of some of the storytelling and that kind of thing that I was really trying to highlight in my review. I was trying to avoid spoilers, obviously. This video will be pretty full of them. And also some other folks who actually have finished the campaign like me and actually into their second run through and are probably almost done with it by now. So I'm gonna just do top five kind of story moments. Now, these are all gonna be most of them are early in the campaign, and then one of them is kind of probably in the last quarter of the campaign. And so I want to just make an honorable mention because I'm not going to mention anything about the final couple of scenarios or fights that you get into, because I want to leave those spoiler free in case somebody that is watching this that is still like trying to debate, if these sound interesting to you. I'll leave those out, but I would really include probably the last two scenarios and kind of how those shake out in this list. But I did kind of a top five here for scenarios that I just thought were awesome, and were part of like what really hooked me into the game. So the first one we'll talk about is I don't remember the names of the scenarios and stuff like that, but there's one where there's like a balcony fight where you are trying to get up and sort of interact with this kind of like the boss of the scenario, and then you're going to go around like the staircase and then get on a balcony. But in the meantime, other minions and stuff are kind of coming in through the front door, so to speak, and then kind of reinforcing the battle. And then there are some civilians and guards and things like that that are kind of on your side. And you have to kind of do a couple of things. You've got to get a certain character up on the balcony to talk to this specific individual, try to convince them to, kind of change what they're doing. And then you also have to make sure that enough of the civilians and stuff don't get captured. So there's a really cool, like, tactical element to this scenario where, and a very cinematic element where you're kind of like, if you've got the right character, you're firing, bow and arrow from the balcony, and then like jumping down from the balcony and all this stuff, and then erecting barricades and all this. This is a real kind of dynamic back and forth with that scenario. It's just really, really fun. And then you get kind of like this wave after wave of monsters, and there's a real tug of war between what your objectives are for the scenario, and just it looks great cinematically with the terrain and rushing around and jumping off a balcony and all this stuff, and then like trying to get a distance where you're trying to plunk arrows at the other guys. So that was my number one, is the balcony fight. The second one is there's one, this one's pretty early, is you are trying to get to a bandit outpost, let's call it, and you go through this like forest maze kind of thing. And so instead of like lining up the edges of the tiles to, you can walk through here and go through here and go through this door, you have these little explore tokens that you sort of bounce around. So you set these little mini pieces of the map that's usually like just one or two tiles next to each other, and then you have to like jump from one to the other, and you sort of have to do a little bit of a puzzle, but then there's like some exploration, sort of figuring out like which token goes to which other map tile, and then back and forth. So it gives you this real sense of kind of being lost in the woods a little bit, because there's not like a clear path that you're going through. But then in that same scenario, when you eventually do find the bandit outpost, you go in and then you just clear everything off the board, and then you set up this little smaller outpost, and then right away, pretty much, like, you'll trigger a trap and the floor will actually drop out from underneath you. You put this little spiked trap underlay thing there, and then depending on what your choices are at that moment, you might save or rescue some characters, and some are inevitably going to fall, and then it takes some damage and that kind of stuff. And then there's definitely different ways to kind of solve the puzzle of getting people out, and then fighting the I think it was the outlaw prince in that scenario. I don't remember exactly, but fighting with the boss and his minions there, and then dealing with people that are down in the pit and stuff. So it's really cool. The only kind of negative about that is like when you set up the bandit outpost, it's like the way I played through it, it was like action, oh, the floor collapses, and I'm like, I got to take this apart. I just set it up together. It wasn't too bad. I was like, come on, let me do some more stuff before you have me rip it down. But just the overall sense of that scenario is really awesome. So that's that forest maze one. And then the next one was a little bit early too. There's one where you go to find, I think his name is Sirius's like mentor, one of his mentors, and it's like a professor's lab, and there's this really interesting like elemental puzzle thing, and you're like sliding bookcases and revealing new rooms, and then there's like a magical ward on a door, and so you've got to kind of deal with some monsters, and then go to bookcases and little lecterns and things like that, and sort of piece together part of this elemental puzzle, and sort of you look at the ward on the door and the elements that are the three elements that are warded on there, and you have to go back and say, oh, okay, there's this like relationship and relativism of one element to another. Some cancel each other out, some will cause explosions, things like that. So you have to kind of work that together and then get in, and then you get through the ward door. And there's another, I think there's a couple of ways to solve this one. I only played through it the one time, but there's like another set of elemental puzzles, and then there's like a chained platform and stuff. So it looks like you can actually solve that one a few different ways. I went through it with the just chopping chains down and stuff, and then there's another thing where like the thing collapses and stuff like that too. So, but that one where you're like in the professor's lab is really cool. Let's see, that was number 3. The fourth one is with the elf character. There's like a I want to call it like a dream sequence, but it's like a mirror sequence where the elf gets kind of whisked away by himself. And so he's exploring through kind of a dreamscape or some kind of other dimensional thing, and the rest of the party's still kind of like in the real world. And then you're using a token for the elf to kind of move it around, and so he can still be interacted with there, but he has no effect on the real world. So you're trying to protect him as he's sort of locked in this trance kind of thing. And then there's like this monster that like you spawn it, and it has like there's like a link between them. There's like the dream version of the monster and then the real one. And so you have to kind of go through there. And that's just like a really, really, really neat. Like, it's not super like tactically as interesting as some of the other ones I just mentioned, but like you just don't see that kind of thing, in a game like this. You just like just the tools and everything that they have here to like leverage that kind of really strange storytelling element and the interaction of that. It was really cool. I'm like, I've never seen like, just dream element, and you're like, it's guiding all this stuff for you, and it's just adding. I mean, you got to play an RPG to do something like that, not just a board game. So that's number 4 there. And the 5th one here, this one I'll just pause on it because it's somewhat of a major story spoiler, but I wanted to pull this one out because it kind of highlights some of the out of actions story points, right? So a lot of all these other 4 were like stuff that happened like in the game when you're going through a dungeon crawl kind of scenario type of event. But this one is, and this happens, I think, I would say it's either 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through, probably more like 3/4. And you kind of feel like you're in like the final battle, but it's not. I think there was probably 3 scenarios after this, other than side quests and stuff, 3 or 4. Then you got to the final battle, but and so the Uthuks are sort of well, I don't want to spoil too much, but there's a thing with a dragon, and then and it attacks the main Frostgate town, and then Bryn is there. Well, not Frostgate, it's the other town next to it, but anyway. So Bryn is there, and Bryn's like one of the first characters, and her aunt is the Baroness, and so again, huge spoilers. Shut this off, but her aunt dies, and then Bryn becomes the Baroness and all this stuff. And that scenario right there, that whole like sequence of that scenario prior to that, and then the story element, how it kind of changed and shifted, and just it was like a tectonic plate shift of the tone and everything of the story. Because at this point, the characters had their own kind of like personal stakes and stuff like that involved with some of the different races and the different sort of political classes of people and that kind of thing. And this was just a really strong moment, I think, in particular for Bryn, the character, where she now becomes Baroness. She's more about, picking up the scraps of what happened with the previous scenario, because I think based on how you play it, the other side is always going to lose, and so the side that you pick, it may or may not win or lose. So there's always going to be, I think, some kind of like picking up the pieces. So it feels, and I hate to use this analogy because it's kind of a touchy subject, it feels like a Game of Thrones kind of thing, where you have the battle with the Night King, and then everybody's just picking up the pieces, and you have sort of the main baddie fight at the end of season 8 with Cersei and everybody down south. But it has that, I don't want to really compare it, but it has that like Titanic shift of like, oh, okay, now we were a group of friends coming together, starting to figure out what we have in common. now this real enemy has reared its head, and we've got to go now and pivot and then react to that. So that kind of thing, it really kind of builds up to that moment and then shifts over, and then you're dealing again with some other stuff. And there's some other things which I'm not going to mention here just to keep it spoiler free, with like some of the allies and stuff that come in at the very end and that kind of thing. Just a really cool kind of arc of, you know, a lot of the characters, and the Brain character especially, good highlight there. But the others, just as important. I wouldn't say they're probably as impactful or monumental as Bryn's arc. Yeah, so that's kind of my top 5 things. So hopefully I didn't spoil it and ruin it for anybody. Of course, there'll be warnings everywhere. But yeah, and if you played the game, you know, yeah, I would say, you know, put spoilers in the comments. I mean, it's a spoiler video, so just, you know, everybody get a heads up there. And now at the end of the video. But yeah, so anyway, any thoughts? You know, curious what you guys thought, or maybe how that, you know, how some of the things went different for you. I mean, I'd be curious about it, just out of general curiosity. So thanks.